Welcome to episode 2 of the Shiny Things Improv podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Balekchin, and this is a place for me to pick the brains of all my favourite improvisers. Today's guest is Alex Berg, a member of Convoy, who've been performing in the US for 20 years and are arguably one of the best teams in the world. The day before we recorded this episode, I had watched them headline the Friday night slot at the Edinburgh Improv Fest. They got a word and did an hour-long show just using tags. It was incredible. The speed and confidence and way that they just accepted each other's offers without any hesitation was unlike anything I've ever seen, and I was left completely in awe. Alex has also taught at UCB for many years and has some fascinating perspectives and useful nuggets of advice. I'm really excited to share this episode with you. Here's a few snippets of what we've got coming up.
That lack of strong choice is more destructive to a scene than making a wrong choice. Because what happens is you make those placeholder choices for long enough, and then you wind up with what feels like a placeholder scene. A lot of the ways I think about improv were shaped by how do I navigate the Herald, which, again, I really love, but it's really difficult. Like, I think anybody who says it's not difficult is lying. If those parts are the most disposable parts of the scene, there's a sense in which they're the least essential, and the parts that stay are the ways those characters are emotionally relating to one another. And so I think, like, more so than try not to be funny, it's just, hey, be confident that you'll get to the funny part of the scene. It is such a privilege as an adult to have a place where for 30 minutes this week, I know I've got 30 minutes where I can just like completely leave all my bullshit at the door and be in a fantasy land.
Alex Berg, welcome to the show. Thanks so much
Thank you.
for being
here. What a fun and spontaneous thing.
Yes, absolutely.
The truest thing you can do at an improv festival is go like, yeah, I'll do a podcast this afternoon.
Yeah. We are at the Edinburgh Improv Festival, and I just did a great workshop with Alex, and he's kindly agreed to have a chat with me about some of the things we did today. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your improv journey and how it started?
Sure. I'm a nerd. I live in LA, I guess is probably a good place to start. I've been out in LA about 20 years now. Moved out there to do improv. Started at IO West in 2004. And then when UCB opened up, started doing stuff there in like spring of 06. I started doing improv itself. I started doing short form at a theater camp when I was like 11, like in 1994. I had never heard of it. I had gone to this camp to make sketches. I didn't know what improv was. And a friend of mine literally was like, come on, just come to this thing. You'll have fun. And I was like, okay. And then, that I wound up doing short form for years from that, and then did a short form in college, and then moved out to LA to do long form. It's been a part of my life for a long time at this point.
And you're a part of Convoy. I saw your show yesterday. It was absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
How long has Convoy been going for?
Convoy started... Convoy used to have a fourth member who died. It's okay. It's ancient history. I don't need anybody's like sympathies for it or whatever. It's all been dealt with. So Convoy started as a four-man troupe. The four of us had done short form together in college. And then Todd and this guy, Matt, who's dead, the dead one, graduated the year before Fernie and myself. And when we got out to LA, we started doing student cage matches at IO West as Allergic to Todd. And then after Matt passed away, we were like, oh, it feels bad to quit doing this. We were all really enjoying what we had been working on and the shows we were doing. So Convoy started formally in January of 2005 and has been going since then. So Convoy's got a solid 20 years under its belt at this point.
Wow.
Yeah, it's weird.
Like improv teams, I've been in a few that have come and gone and tried to hold some together. And how do you manage to maintain a team for that long where everyone is still around and wanting to play?
I think there's a couple of things. The biggest one is just luck. I think that Convoy happened to be really lucky with the timing of when we started doing stuff. We started doing stuff in LA when the LA scene was growing and hungry for new shows. And also at a time when the LA indie scene was really growing and establishing itself. And because of that, we were able to again, really by dumb luck. I don't want to paint this as a situation where it's, we figured it out, we cracked the system, and you can too, because I don't know. But we were able to get ourselves a weekly slot at IO West not long after we started. And then after doing cage matches at UCB LA for about a year, we were able to get ourselves a weekly slot there, which we held until the theater shut down for the pandemic. And I think without those weekly slots, I can't say what would have happened, but those weekly slots led to professional opportunities, which kept us working together and really creatively and intellectually engaged with what we were doing on stage, and that fed into more professional opportunities. Like, again, all of that is dumb luck. We happen to be three idiots in the right place at the right time. It is crazy to be like, oh yeah, I guess it's been 20 years. I started doing improv with those guys when I was too young to drink. Yeah.
I think watching the show last night, something that I really noticed was how there's never any doubt in your responses. As soon as someone makes a choice, it's immediately accepted, and that's now the reality. Yeah. And it moves very quickly in that way, and it's so wonderful to watch that, because so often I find myself and improv that you watch, you're like, oh, is that what we're doing, or is that, and then
there's a hesitancy a lot
yeah,
of the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you guys have absolutely none of that. Is that simply that you've been playing together so long, or is there something that you've trained that into you?
Well, I think it's mostly that we've been playing together for so long, and one of the things you see frequently is, you know, in a lot of shows, you'll have everybody in the cast is a very good improviser, but that grouping of improvisers does not necessarily have a lot of experience as a group. And you can get very good shows that way. I've been parts of shows like that have gone very well. But that is different from when you have a group of improvisers and that group has a specific goal and that group has a specific sense of humor, and everybody either has expressly articulated what the goals for the show are at some point, or they intuitively know it, or both. And I think with Convoy, we spent so long really trying to nail down, hey, why did that show work and that one didn't? We used to videotape all of our shows. And then our rehearsals, we would watch them back down and be like, okay, we hit a lull here. And then we would, like, especially when we were still figuring it out, be like, why was that a lull? Like, those choices felt on paper like they should have worked. Well, in the context of these other choices, it was like that sort of a thing. And we don't rehearse anymore, and we haven't for a while, but we still have those conversations after shows. Well, you know, even after last night, it's like, yeah, we hit a little bit of a lull here, but, you know, we were able to pull out of it. Here's how we pulled out of it. Yeah, we should just watch out for this in the next show. We'll have those conversations before shows in the green room and stuff. And I think a lot of groups, after a certain point, just treat their improv shows as like, hey, this is where I get to come and hang out with my friends. Those shows can be very enjoyable. I'm not trying to inherently knock that. But it's different from, hey, we're trying to do a very specific thing on stage. And I feel fortunate that the other two dudes in Convoy have that same mentality.
Yeah, I think it's hard to find that when you have a whole group that has that same sort of goal.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Today we did a workshop called Make a Goddamn Choice.
Make a goddamn choice.
Where did that come from, and why did you want to run a workshop?
It came from just years and years of teaching. I teach less now than I used to, but years and years of teaching, years and years of coaching, both in person and then during the pandemic on Zoom and whatever else. And noticing that people would be so in their heads about making a right choice that they wouldn't really make a choice at all. They would make these kind of, I call them placeholder choices, at the tops of scenes where it's like, well, I know I need to be speaking so that we're not just standing here in silence, but rather than make a choice that sets up a specific reality in a specific direction for the scene to go in, I'm going to make these kind of half choices that leave my options open. And in my opinion, that lack of strong choice is more destructive to a scene than making a wrong choice. Because what happens is you make those placeholder choices for long enough, and then you wind up with what feels like a placeholder scene. And if you don't have a player who feels either empowered enough to make a strong choice on their own, or doesn't feel confident enough, they're too in their head, they've gotten too many notes, they're trying to thread the needle too hard, you wind up with these scenes where it's like, yeah, on paper, we're doing all the right things, but it's just not coming together. And I think it's because of those placeholder choices. So that was the impetus for the class. I don't remember why I titled it Crankily. I'm glad I did, but I stand behind the cranky title, but I don't remember what inspired that particular thing. Like a week before the festival, I'm like, all right, I should figure out like curricula for the workshops I'm teaching. I'll go look up what I said I would teach. Make a goddamn choice. Like, they must have emailed me on a day where I was like, I'll tell them what I'll teach, but yeah.
That's funny because it actually, the title really resonated with me because I often come off and I'm like, why didn't you just make a choice? So it actually was quite, I was like, oh, he's going to
I'm glad that's how it was taken. I hope you speak for everyone else who signed up for the workshop.
I definitely suffer from that, wanting to make the right choice, or often feeling like I don't want to get in the way of someone else's. I have that thing of, oh, they probably know what the scene is about, and I don't want to.
Yeah. Also, I think I find improvisers as a group to be almost supportive to a fault. Certainly in contrast with the times I've been, even just like backstage doing bits with stand-ups or even sketch comedians, like it's fundamentally a supportive art form. And I think that what happens a lot of the time, those who can't tell from the way I speak and comport myself, I'm a cishet white man. Like, I have been born with every fucking privilege. There's a sense in which the improv community is dominated by people who look like me, who think like me, who act like me, who talk like me. There's a sense in which the improv community was built for people like me. And I think there are a lot of people like me who have no problem making those choices because every teacher they've ever had has looked like them and been like, yeah, you go do that. And I think that inevitably creates a second group of people who do not innately feel like they have that or that ability. And a lot of the hesitancy that you speak of, I think, comes in some places from a place of genuine respect for the other person you're on stage with, and in some places comes from a kind of like more internalized, hey, I'm not the one who's supposed to speak up right now. And that internalization can come from the other improviser is your senior, the other improviser is someone who you had as a teacher years ago, whether or not they carry themselves in a way where they demand deference. Most improvisers don't. That tends to be something that comes alongside. That's like the negative side of being overly supportive, is you support the other player at the expense of whatever it is you're trying to get into a scene. And that's something I've noticed a lot in classes with students I've had. And so I think like just trying to encourage everybody to be like, no, the improv scene is stronger for everybody's inclusion. The scene will be stronger for the inclusion of your ideas, particularly if they run counter to what I'm thinking. Like, I don't want to be in charge of the whole scene. That's stressful. I want you, my scene partner, to give me something I'm not expecting so that I can deal with it and be surprised. That's what's more fun. So there's a lot that goes into it, but I do think that a lot of people just fundamentally feel like it's not, even if they're on stage, they feel like it's not their time to pipe up. And I think it's important to push back on that.
Mm-hmm. I often find myself, and a lot of people I talk to find themselves using the term getting stuck in your head.
Yes.
And I think we covered that, the sort of counter to that being when you're in the flow state. And definitely watching you guys last night, it felt like the speed at which you moved, that you never had any time to even think about.
Yeah.
To be in your head to even think about it. Whereas I often, I'm on the back line and I'm like, oh, shouldn't I, would that be a good tag? And then by the time the moment passes and I'm like, oh, that probably was a good tag. And then I'm thinking about that instead of being present in the scene. Is that something, again, that just comes over time, or do you have tricks or methods that you use to stay so present and in the flow?
I think even for me, it's different team to team. The team that played last night, Convoy, there's only 3 of us. So if there's 2 people on stage and you're on the back line, you have to be paying such close attention because whatever's happening next is on you. It is technically possible for someone in the scene to tag out, move it somewhere else, but like really the pressure's on you. That pressure helps keep me engaged. Another team I play with in LA, Sentimental Lady, there's 8 of us. And so if there's 2 people on stage, like it's harder for me. It takes a lot more conscious effort, I should say, to have that same level of engagement because on the one hand, part of my brain sees 4 or 5 other people standing along the back line with me. And I don't know, Susie Barrett's on that team. I'm not going to trust Susie to take care of it. Of course I'm going to trust Susie to take care of it. She's phenomenal. but I don't want to put that all on Suze. And it's tougher to do when you're on a bigger team. Certain forms make it more difficult. I find a herald is very difficult to stay engaged with. I love it as a form. I think it's a very rewarding form, but it's also a form where you're like, hey, what's going on right now is not necessarily on me. I may be looking for an edit, but I also have a lot of homework I need to be doing on the back line about what's the second beat going to be and that sort of stuff. It's difficult to convince yourself that time is better spent watching the show that's happening than planning the show that might, and you learn that over time. But it's, for me, Convoy, and I think part of the reason why Convoy wound up doing the form it was doing was because all three of us were like, no, this is what it takes to keep us engaged and to keep us challenged for the duration of the show. There's no time to be in your head, because if there's any time, I'll go right in my head, and I don't want to do that.
I noticed today, I think something that really struck me was what the scene is about, in inverted commas, is not what the scene really is about. It's about emotional. So we did a lot of where you're sort of making the choices of the location and the things that you're doing, but really what you're trying to find is the thing that's happening between the two people and the emotional states of them. And that really struck me as a useful way to think of the scene, and that those choices of like where you are, what you're doing, don't really matter.
Yeah.
You just have to make them and then find out what's happening beneath the surface.
Yeah. For years, I was on Herald teams and then was a teacher at UCB. And for the core curriculum, you're teaching the Herald, would coach Herald teams at the theater for a long time. And so a lot of the ways I think about improv were shaped by how do I navigate the Herald, which, again, I really love, but it's really it's difficult. Like, I think anybody who says it's not difficult is lying. And one of the things that for me specifically with the Herald I had to figure out was I started doing the Herald at IO, which does not have game as its central philosophy. IO's central philosophy and the motivating thing behind any scene was like, you have to have a really truthful reaction in the moment, even to the detriment of whether or not the scene is funny. Like they would actively say, don't worry about making it funny, just make it feel true. And which is why I think like when you look at some of the improvisers who come out of IO West, groups like Dasariski, people like Tammy Sager, like they're capable of having these just incredibly small and subtle, but like beautifully like well-rendered characters that just feel like real human beings. But they never do it at the expense of comedy. They're incredibly funny. But as a student, I was not capable of that, and so then then UCB opened up and I left my IO Herald team and went over to UCB, and they were focused on game. And that really changed the angle of attack on second and third beats. At IO, our first beats were used almost like openings from which to organically initiate the second beat. And at UCB, that was not the case. The first beats were driven by this engine of game, and then you had to find a way to take that engine and use it to drive the second beat, whether it was analogous or time dash. And so then that kind of meant that you had to really, for me at least, I had to really start thinking about those first beats in terms of what gets left behind. And the things that get left behind are the set and setting, the characters, right? Like you did a scene today where you and Molly, whose last name I don't know, and I don't know yours either, I don't want to know it, but were like a banker and his daughter planning the world's saddest vacation. The fact that you are a banker doesn't really matter. The fact that she was your daughter doesn't really matter. What really matters is like the level of like hope and then crushed hope that is processed through whatever this event is. Doesn't matter that it's a vacation. Looking at that, if you had to do a second beat of it, you go, what are the parts I throw out? If those parts are the most disposable parts of the scene, there's a sense in which they're the least essential. And the parts that stay are the ways those characters are emotionally relating to one another. I want to be very clear. I think Fernie would probably disagree with me on what I just said, because like none of that is what's funny about the scene. There's nothing inherently funny about the emotional content of it. And that's a very fair point. But for me, when I was like, okay, I'm doing a Herald, there's so much shit going on to pay attention to and keep track of. I'm going to the back line. I do not want to be on the back line planning out my initiation. I think that's the death of the second beat. What's the smallest kernel of stuff that I can hang on to, not only for my scene, but for everyone else's scenes to help me keep track of it? And that's kind of what led to winnowing it down to that emotional content. For me, that made sense. I don't think that's going to make sense for everybody. I don't mean to say that's the only way or the proper way to navigate a herald, but for me, that was helpful.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the term try not to be funny? A lot of people say don't try to be funny. And I have often thought that sounds great. And then I've been really good at not being funny.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm like, it would be nice if I could choose to be a bit funny.
Yeah.
How do you approach that kind of thing?
I mean, it's funny because we are doing a comedy show. You should be trying to be a little bit funny. But I think what happens is really no one has any problem with people trying to be funny during a comedy show. It's that there's a kind of sweaty, desperate, zany funny that we're trying to avoid. Like that kind of I'll do anything for a laugh. Like that feels desperate. And so I think more so than try not to be funny, it's just, hey, be confident that you'll get to the funny part of the scene. You're in a situation when you're doing an improv show where everybody on stage is looking for something funny to happen. Everybody in the audience is looking for something funny to happen. Even things that you don't think are funny will get laughs from an audience just because they resonate for some reason or another. There's going to be something funny that happens. So I think really what it is, let's not be desperate about the funny. Let's be willing to sit in a scene for a moment or two if there's not laughs happening, and trust that that's just the audience paying attention and being tuned in. We don't need to do a, zany pratfall or all of a sudden start speaking in a crazy voice. Sometimes that stuff works. Sometimes that stuff's the absolute proper move. But there is I think the audience can smell fear, and I think it's really a turnoff. And so I think it's that kind of fear-based desperation funny that we're trying to avoid.
Yeah. You mentioned in the workshop today that you don't love doing premise.
No, I'm bad at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm bad at it. It's not. I would love to be good at it, but here I sit, 20 some odd years of doing long form improv, and I am not good at it.
Do you think that's because what I find to do premise, it almost requires me to be partially in my head, and so it's much harder to get into that flow present state because it's so hard not to write the scene.
Yeah, I think some people, and I really think Matt Besser deserves credit for making premise look easy. I mean, watching Matt Besser do an ASCAT or something, he pulls premise and initiates premise so clearly that it makes you as an audience member feel stupid that you didn't already have that premise locked and loaded. And that's the case with anyone who's skilled at anything. They make it look easy and you think you can do it. And then next thing you know, you're on American Idol and you're pitchy or whatever it is. But I think it's just a question of certain people's brains work different ways. And I think that for a lot of theaters who form house teams, like at UCB, for instance, we're going to put this team together and we're going to tell you guys you're doing a Herald for the next year. A Herald is really a premise-based form. And so there's a lot of pressure in those situations to try to do premise-based initiations. It's almost a waste of an opening if you do an organic initiation in a first beat of a Herald or in a group game. There are certain times when it's fine to do if you've run out of information, but really if you're in a form that's doing an opening and you're not pulling premise, you're kind of wasting the audience's time a little bit. And I just think certain people's brains are more equipped for that. In the same way that, I don't know, I play a lot of video games. I can't do first-person camera angles. I just can't. It confuses me. I could do third person. That's fine. But I think the important thing is a lot of people are bad at premise-based initiations and don't ever have a form or a scenario where they're given permission to not do premise-based initiations. And it creates a self-perpetuating negative relationship with the beginnings of scenes, where the scenes always feel either overwrought or the premise is half-baked. And so then the scenes wind up starting with a lot of confusion and people trying to fill in the gaps, because when you initiate with a half premise, people think you have a strong idea, and then they're like, okay, I'm going to give you space to get it out, and then they don't get it out, and you're like, what are we doing here? I've always been much more comfortable just being I don't know, we got a word. I'll just start doing something and figure it out as we go along. But yeah, I have the utmost respect for people who are good at it. I'm just not one of those people.
Yeah. Coming back to choices, what advice would you give to people who find themselves in a scene where it feels sticky? You get into that position where you're like, we know where we are, we know what we're doing, but there's nothing really there yet.
Yeah.
What sort of advice would you give to people in that situation?
I would look for an excuse to have something really matter. There's nothing objectively important, which means there's nothing objectively unimportant. Which means even if you're in a scene and your two characters are for some reason counting like dust mites in pillowcases, or like, I don't know, just like the most boring thing you can think of, there's someone on this planet for whom that's like deeply exciting. I was reading a book about the James Webb Space Telescope recently called Pillars of Creation by Richard Panik. And one of the opening scenes of the book is an astronomer at a conference getting like an email with, the way it's described, it sounds like a matrix style grid of numbers, and this astronomer is so blown away that they start like calling people and stuff. And it's like, I don't know, I think for most people, if we saw a matrix style grid of numbers, we'd be like, cool. But for that astronomer, it was deeply impactful. It had to do with some kind of chemical signature that I'm not going to get right, in some stellar cloud or something like that. But you can make a choice to be interested. My girlfriend plays a lot of Fortnite. I used to play Fortnite. I'm not trying to judge her. And I'm not judging you. She'll finish a round and I'll be like in the other room doing something else. And she'll come in like breathless with excitement and be like, oh my God, and it got down to the last minute. I only had the sticky gun. And it's like, it's hugely important to her. And so I think you can always make the choice for your characters to care more. And if your scene is petering out, it's probably because the characters just don't care enough about what's going on. And if the characters don't care, then the audience certainly isn't going to care. The audience is always looking to you to know how to act during a show. And so if you find yourself in one of those situations where like nothing's quite happening, just find a reason to care. It might be arbitrary at first. You can justify it after the fact, but your characters have to care about what's going on. Otherwise, what are we doing here? Why would we choose? We have a cosmic radio dial with an improv scene. We could be anywhere at any point in time in anything. Why would we choose to go somewhere where everyone is like, yeah, I don't know, I can take it or leave it. I don't really care whether or not I get salmon on my bagel. It's like, well, then don't be at a bagel shop, you know? Does that make sense? I rambled, but I think it makes sense.
Something else that we talked about today was when you don't know exactly what something is in a scene.
Yeah.
And a lot of the sort of common terms that you hear are play to the top of your intelligence, don't be bad at your job. And it was really interesting to hear you be a lot more subtle with that advice and be like, if you don't know something, then your character doesn't know that thing. And even if you think they should, it's actually much better to play the character that doesn't know what that is. In our case, that was a watchmaker.
A bezel on a watch.
Yeah,
yes.
A watchmaker who didn't know what a bezel was. I think in my mind, I'd be like, oh God, I can't be a watchmaker who doesn't know what a bezel is, because then I'm bad at my job, or I'm not smart. I'm not playing to the top of my intelligence.
Yeah, my counterpoint, and just I'll tell you to your face now, you're wrong. You can be a watchmaker that doesn't know what a bezel is. But I think for me, it's I hear genuinely where you're coming from with I don't want to be a watchmaker who doesn't know what a bezel is. But for me as a performer, I go, I don't want to be a character who knows more about what's going on than I do, because I can't play that character. Again, I have a loose idea of what a bezel is. Like my grandfather was a watchmaker, and I think at some point I just osmosed it, but I couldn't speak at length about it. And that's part of the push-pull of a scene, right? Like your scene partners are making choices for you and you want them to. That puts you out of your comfort zone in good and important ways. But I think you fundamentally have to be honest about what characters you are able to play. Like I could not play a character who was obsessed with sports. Like I could get you a first paragraph of Wikipedia about what baseball is, but I genuinely don't understand why someone would enjoy watching a baseball game. Like my mind reels at the thought of such a thing. So I could never play a guy who was a baseball obsessive. There have been times, like I mentioned Sentimental Lady earlier. One of the other players on that team is Johnny Meeks, who's a really phenomenal improviser, head of the training academy of UCB for a decade plus now. He loves the Cardinals, who are a baseball team. And that about ends everything I know of them. And there would be times when we'd be on stage and he would just, as a setting for a scene, he would choose a baseball game. And I would have to just, at the top, and I learned this the hard way, but at the top of the scenes, I would just have to be like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm having a good time. Because otherwise you might be called upon to say what's going on. And if you can't play that, then either you're being dishonest to the character choice you made earlier, or you have to do all this like sweaty legwork to like talk your way around that gap in your knowledge. And I think it's much better just to admit what you don't know and have that be part of your character choice. Nobody knows everything. Our characters shouldn't have to either. Be bad at your job. Who says you can't have a character that's bad at their job? Where is this a London thing? Where does that advice come?
Yeah, that's definitely something that we've been taught. I think it comes from not making the game, just being someone who's just, maybe it comes from actually not caring. So someone who like doesn't care about their job and just is just bad, and then that's the thing. It's not that fun to have someone who's just, I'm a doctor, I don't know anything about the body.
Yeah, maybe don't be blasé.
Yeah, so I guess you could be, it would be quite funny if you were bad, but you felt so bad about the fact you were bad. Really conscientiously bad.
Yeah, honestly, a doctor who's bad at their job, but knows it and feels awful, I really shouldn't be doing this. That sounds great. That sounds like a very playable scene to me.
Yeah. Do you feel that improv has helped you in other aspects of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the stereotype, right? Every improviser is, life is improv, don't you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a stereotype for a reason, but like it is. But for me, improv has been, it's added a lot of structure to my life, which pursuing a career in entertainment has zero structure in LA. You know, you can't work nights because you want to do shows. You can't work days because you want to keep your days free for auditions. You can't have a long-term job because you might need to leave it if this thing you're pitching goes. Like, it's just, there's a lot of ambiguity and stuff that, for me as a guy with OCD, turns out pairs pretty poorly with my brain chemistry. But improv was always a very nice, very regular. I have a show on Thursday, I have a show on Saturday, I have rehearsal on Tuesday, I have rehearsal on Friday. Whatever it is, I'm teaching a class. Like, that structure I think was really helpful for me. And then the shows, I think, were absolute beacons for me during 1,000 different difficult times of differing levels. But it is such a privilege as an adult to have a place where for 30 minutes this week, I know I've got 30 minutes where I can just like completely leave all my bullshit at the door and be in a fantasy land of my own creating. Like, where else do you get that? What do you do? And then I really have a hard time imagining. I read a quote from Bryan Cranston once where he was talking about being a young actor pre-Malcolm in the Middle, and maybe even pre-Seinfeld, where he was doing Tim Whatley. But he was saying he would study, and then his auditions were his performances. And Bryan Cranston is obviously pretty brilliant, in my opinion. But I can't imagine having to wait for an audition to do comedy. Like, I would lose my mind. And I think it's why so many people do stuff online and podcasts and YouTube and all that other thing. But when I was coming up, that wasn't a thing. You had a stage show. Like, that YouTube didn't start until a couple years after I got out to LA. Podcasts started like around the same time, but Fernie and I had a sketch website where we'd upload one sketch a week, but that was so much work. And then the payoff was like, maybe someone on MySpace would call you a homophobic slur. It wasn't the same as being in a stage and just having that immediate feedback. And so like that has always been very rewarding in and of itself. That's the best part of all of it. That's my favorite part of it all. So I'm glad I still get to do that.
Yeah. What do you do when you want to not do improv?
I'll tell you when it happens. Do you mean like if there's a night where I'm like not in the mood and I have a show?
Sometimes, sometimes I tend to go through waves of like, I make more and more and more and more of my life about improv until my whole life is improv. And then I'm like, oh man, this is too much. I need to go and do something else.
Yeah. I turned up the bass to the detriment of the treble. Yes. I'm fortunate enough to be through that phase of things. I think it's okay to turn down shows and stuff like that. But I also think I'm lucky in that because I've had regular shows for so long, it's a privilege to be able to turn down a show. You know, it's like I know when my next show is going to be. I know who I'm doing it with. Like, I know what theater it's going to be at. And I think for a long time, you don't know that. And so there's this kind of, it's almost like an insurance policy to overextend yourself. But I think there does come a point where you start feeling like just like the little stirrings and like pricklings of I don't know if it's resentment or you get annoyed that you have a commitment for a show or something like that, as opposed to being something you look forward to. And I think when you start feeling that, it's worth it to take a real serious inventory of, hey, what groups am I in? Like there was a point during the pandemic when I was coaching online, and I think I was coaching like 12 groups a week. And at a certain point I was like, this is too much. This is a full seventh of my week coaching online. It was the pandemic. We were all sick of Zoom for 1,000 different reasons, but not because of anyone in the groups. It was just like, okay, I'm not going to do more than one a day. Each day I'm going to pick one group, and that's going to be the one I stick with, and I'm just going to let the others know I'm done. And that was necessary because that preserved my relationship with improv as being positive rather than negative. My advice would be like, when it starts tilting over and you start having those negative feelings, don't try to muscle through it. Just be like, hey, I'm overextended. Water finds its own level, sort of a thing.
Yeah. What advice or so the London improv scene right now is
tell me what's going on. Are you guys like at the top of the Shard just throwing steak and kidney pies?
Yeah, it's basically dominating London. It's keeping London afloat, actually.
Yeah. That's what I hear. That's what we hear across the pond.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very early days. There's 2 larger schools, a couple of smaller ones, but it sounds very much like those sort of early 2000 days of LA. There's slowly more and more indie nights happening. Some come and go.
And do the schools in London, do you organize around like a central philosophy or a form or a structure? What kind of, or maybe none of that? I'm just curious how.
So the Free Association is very much UCB style. We have Harold teams. It's very much long form, game orientated. I think Hoopla offers a wider range of things. They also do Harold courses, but they also do a sort of wider range of courses that cover different aspects, short form, all that kind of stuff as well. And there is obviously the only history of improv really in London is short form. And there's a group called the Comedy Store Players that have been going for, I don't know, years and years. And some of them are on TV, and people know the Comedy Store Players, but if you were like, what's improv? They'd be like, I don't really know. You'd be like, oh, the Comedy Store. Oh, yeah, of course I know that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it still feels very early days in London for improv, but growing quickly. And I think there's now a lot more people, especially sort of young professionals, realizing how enriching the experience of just doing an improv class is when you spend so much of your day in your head, in front of a computer or at home on your own. The being engaged in a community in London is such a very rare thing, and improv really offers that in a way that not many things can.
A thing I have noticed the further I seep into adulthood, I'm cresting 40 at the current moment, is I have taken for granted the community I've gotten from improv. I just assumed because I was in college and then I moved out to LA, and when you're in college, hey, you got a ton of friends, everyone's around, everyone's partying. And then I got out to LA and there were all these people at the theater who were my same age and doing the same stuff I was doing, and we all hang out after shows and stuff like that. I feel very fortunate to have wound up with just a bunch of friends. And then I'll talk to friends of mine from college who moved to other cities, or family members who live other places. And the thing that always gets me is my sister, who is a lawyer for the EPA at this moment, but will probably be fired in the next 30 minutes or something. Good luck, Liz. She at one point was telling me, she's, oh yeah, we had 4 friends, but 2 of them had a baby and moved. So now we have 2 friends. And I was like, what? And like when we were growing up, she was way more social than I'm not a social person. And so I think also like that sense of community, you're talking about like how has improv impacted my life outside of improv. It's like, I also just have a bunch of friends I can rely on for all kinds of crap. And I think that's something that came along for the ride with my interest in improv that I didn't really appreciate until I'd already been doing it for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, it's addictive, I think.
Yeah, yes, very much so.
I think, because I think, weirdly, it's how humans evolved to exist, is in these communities where it's not like you're not making an appointment to go and catch up with someone. You're just existing around, and you're seeing this person, you're seeing that person because you happen to cross paths.
Yes.
And that feels like such a... And then you obviously build stronger relationships with some of them more than others, but it really feels like a natural way for a human to exist.
Yeah, I mean, I still have such a hard time like reaching out to someone to make plans, even very close friends. And something that the pandemic really highlighted was there was a huge community of people who, prior to the pandemic, I would have casual conversations with because we were teaching classes at the same time, or their show was before mine and I'd run into them backstage or something like that. A lot of those conversations would just be bits, but a surprising amount of them would be like nerding out about very niche, finer points of like improv theory and stuff. And those were really enriching. And when the pandemic hit, all that stuff disappeared immediately. And my God, did you feel the absence of it like right away? I presume you had a similar experience in London, but...
Yeah, no, I think I was only just coming into improv right before the pandemic.
Yeah,
so
the perfect time to start.
Yeah.
Took your first class in February 2013 or something like that?
It wasn't far off that, yeah. Yeah. But weirdly, I actually found the pandemic helped me get into improv in a way because I then could commit to doing... Obviously, it was Zooms. It wasn't ideal, but... Yeah, I could then just commit to doing lots of improv, and it became actually quite a nice thing to do through that. Yeah. And then when it all opened up, I was like, oh, great, now I can
now I can go do it.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, the downside was there was no way to practice shows, so you thought you did it on Zoom. You're like, I think I've got this.
Well, and also going in the opposite direction was so weird. Convoy, pretty early on in the pandemic, was like, we're just sitting here. Let's do shows just for our own sake. And just figuring that out was like, none of us, we're not technically savvy people. We don't stream. We don't have a podcast. So it's just like trying to figure out OBS and being like, is the audio working? I think I have to download a driver. And then just dealing with that as a different format, having no feedback from the audience was so weird. Like it's just a totally different beast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't think I could say I saw a good Zoom show. I'm sure there were some.
There must have been. There must have been. Like people did radio plays.
Yeah, no,
for
yeah,
like
exactly.
decades. It must be possible, but I think it's its own dark art.
Yeah. Just before we finish, my last question to you: what advice would you offer people just coming into improv now? Is there a sort of a thing in retrospect you wish someone had told you when you were just starting out?
That's a good question. I mean, for me, I think looking back on the way I approached improv, and this might be unique to doing it in Los Angeles, was I did love improv for its own sake, but there was also always a sense in which, hey, because other people at the theater would get discovered and go on to do sitcoms and that sort of stuff. And there was always a sense of, even if I wasn't treating it as a stepping stone, there was always a sense that it could be. And holding out that hope that it might be, I think pulled me out of the moment. And I think the ultimate reason to do an improv show is to do an improv show. And if you're doing it for some other reason, that's not necessarily bad, but it's worth examining. And for me, I've stepped away from pursuing a career in entertainment after being fully rebuffed by the city of Los Angeles. They say it's not who you are, it's who you know, but at a certain point you know everybody, and then you're like, it's who I am. We can say it, it's okay, it's who I am. And that's basically post-pandemic. Now, when I do an improv show, it's, hey, I want to do this improv show. It's not that I'm expecting to have this lead to an audition or to a pitch or anything. It's because I think this is fun and I think this is worth doing. And I think that making sure you're approaching everything in life, but particularly improv with that level of immediacy and not treating it as a stepping stone, which is, again, very common to see people doing in LA. You'll get people in classes who are like, I'm only here because my commercial agent said I had to have UCB on my resume. And it's been, I don't know, I don't feel like you're really going to be a great contributor to class. Like the best students, always the best students are men and women in their 60s and 70s who have nothing to prove. They've had genuine accomplishments in their life, career accomplishments, family accomplishments. This is just a thing they were curious about. And they're coming at it with humility and grace and genuine commitment, right? They weren't like the best thing in their college's improv troupe, and now they're like trying to fight their teacher on notes. They're not like really sweatily trying to impress someone who might be able to put in a good word for them with the Herald Committee to get them on a house team. They're just like, I don't know, I thought I'd do this. It'd be a fun way to meet people, and I think I might be good at it. Just for sake of doing it. Like, that's the attitude. I wish I had had more of that attitude when I was younger.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in London, because there is no route through improv to anything, That is most people's.
That's
thankfully.
most places. Like one of the things that was really common at UCB UCB used to have something called UCB Tourco, where colleges, universities, theaters would hire out like a group of 4 or 5 UCB performers to come do a show for the weekend and teach workshops. And one of the things that was pretty universal in everybody's Tourco experience is when you taught a workshop outside of LA, there was I don't know, I'm just going to sound like a fucking idiot talking about this, and I have to accept that. But there was a kind of purity to it. I remember we did a show for a university outside of Seattle, like University of Puget Sound or something like that, and did a workshop, and the people there just wanted to do improv. There wasn't anything more to it. There was no ego. No one thought it was punk rock. Like, remember that era? That was wild. They just wanted to do it for its own sake. And everybody who taught those workshops from Tourco, taught those workshops outside of LA, would come back being reminded that was an option. And I think that was always something that was really energizing in a very positive way for those of us who taught those workshops. And I think that we all took the wrong note. We took the note, I got to go do more of those workshops, as opposed to, I got to bring more of that energy to improv myself. And so that's what I would say is do it for its own sake. It's worth doing for its own sake. It won't take you anywhere, and it shouldn't. It was never designed to. But like doing it for its own sake, fucking rules.
And on that note, Alex Berg, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Thanks for listening to the Shiny Things podcast. Don't forget to head over to shinythingscomedy.com for loads more improv-related posts, where you can sign up to our newsletter so you get all of our new content straight to your inbox. Until next time, I've been Aaron Berg. Happy improving.